My name is Logan Price, and I'm 38 years old. Until last Friday at 5:01 p.m., I was a senior internal auditor at ArcLight Systems, a mid-sized energy consulting firm nestled in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains outside Boulder, Colorado. I lived alone in a modest ranch house on the outskirts of town. No wife, no kids, no mortgage I couldn't handle on my own. I'd turned down lucrative offers from the Big Four accounting firms years ago, choosing stability over prestige. That decision seemed foolish now as I stared at the termination email glowing on my laptop screen. The message was clinical in its brevity. Organizational restructuring due to cost pressures. No personal reasons cited, no performance issues, no warning signs. Just a digital pink slip delivered while I was finishing my weekly expense report. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent the better part of 3 years meticulously documenting every financial irregularity I'd encountered at ArcLight, storing copies of suspicious contracts and invoices in a locked drawer of my home office. Documents that painted a picture of systematic fraud I'd been too cautious to report. That caution had cost me my job. Now, it was time to see what my silence had bought the company. I poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon and sat in my leather chair. The one piece of furniture I'd splurged on when I first moved to Colorado. The amber liquid burned, but not as much as the realization that I'd been played. Bradley Torrance, ArcLight's CEO, had built his reputation on aggressive cost-cutting and operational efficiency. Apparently, that efficiency extended to eliminating the one person who might have noticed his creative accounting methods. The USB drive containing my backup files had been sitting in that locked drawer for 2 years. An insurance policy I'd hoped never to use. I'd copied everything: contracts with mysterious consulting firms, invoices for services that seemed to exist only on paper, payment authorizations that bypassed normal approval channels. At the time, I'd told myself I was just being thorough, maintaining proper documentation. The truth was simpler. I'd smelled something rotten and wanted proof before I stuck my neck out. Now I had nothing left to lose. The first document I opened was a consulting agreement with Centerview Analytics, dated 18 months ago. The contract was for strategic market analysis, a broad enough description to cover virtually any work, or no work at all. The payment schedule was generous, $125,000 quarterly, with bonuses for exceptional insights. Over 6 quarters. ArcLight had paid Centerview nearly $500,000. I'd never seen a single report from Centerview. Never met anyone who worked there. Never even seen their name mentioned in internal communications outside of the payment authorizations. When I'd casually asked about them in a staff meeting, Bradley had given me a sharp look and changed the subject. The registered address for Centerview Analytics was a P.O. box in Wilmington, Delaware. Standard practice for shell companies seeking favorable corporate laws. But I'd done my homework. The actual business address, buried in the fine print of the incorporation documents, was a residential street in Billings, Montana. A quick Google search of that address 3 months ago had revealed a modest suburban home owned by Marcus Torrance, Bradley's brother-in-law. I opened a spreadsheet and began mapping the financial flows. Centerview was just the beginning. Over the past 3 years, ArcLight had paid consulting fees to no fewer than 7 companies, all with Delaware incorporations and Montana addresses. The total exceeded $5 million. Money that should have gone to legitimate business expenses, employee benefits, or shareholder dividends had instead been funneled through a network of shell companies controlled by Bradley's extended family. The bourbon glass sat empty beside my keyboard as I worked through the night. By dawn, I had a comprehensive picture of the fraud. Payment authorizations bearing Bradley's signature, often for amounts just under the threshold that would require board approval. Invoices for services that couldn't be verified. Wire transfers to accounts that led nowhere. Most damning of all were the employment classification changes. Over the past year, ArcLight had reclassified nearly 30 full-time employees as independent contractors, eliminating their benefits and reducing the company's tax obligations. These weren't legitimate consultant relationships. The affected employees still worked exclusively for ArcLight, still used company email addresses, still attended staff meetings. They'd simply been stripped of their employment protections to improve Bradley's bottom line. I'd participated in that process, reviewing the financial impact of the reclassifications. At the time, I'd focused on the numbers, not the human cost. Now, thinking about my former colleagues who'd lost their health insurance and retirement contributions, the fraud felt personal. The law firm I chose was small, just 3 attorneys in a converted Victorian house in downtown Denver. I'd found them through a former college roommate who'd used them for a whistleblower case involving government contracts. The senior partner, Margaret Chen, had the kind of sharp eyes that suggested she'd seen her share of corporate malfeasance. "You understand the risks," she said after reviewing my documentation. "ArcLight will claim you're a disgruntled employee seeking revenge. They'll challenge your credibility, question your motives, maybe even suggest you fabricated evidence." "The evidence speaks for itself," I replied. "Wire transfers don't lie." "No, they don't. But companies like ArcLight have resources. They'll hire expensive lawyers, public relations firms, private investigators. They'll make this personal." I thought about my empty house, my canceled health insurance, my uncertain future. "It's already personal," Margaret nodded. "Then let's file with the IRS and the Department of Labor. The feds take employment fraud seriously, especially when it involves tax evasion." The complaints were submitted on a Tuesday morning. By Thursday, federal investigators had requested additional documentation from ArcLight. By Friday, 2 unmarked sedans were parked outside the company's headquarters. I learned about the investigation from a former colleague who sent me a cryptic text. "Feds are here, Bradley locked in his office, shredding trucks out back." I allowed myself a small smile. 3 years of meticulous documentation versus a few hours of document destruction. The math wasn't complicated. That afternoon, I posted a single message on LinkedIn. Truth has a way of surfacing. 6 words that generated more engagement than anything I'd ever written. Former ArcLight employees began reaching out, sharing their own stories of questionable business practices. The floodgates had opened. The first news story appeared the following Tuesday in the Denver Business Journal. Energy firm under federal investigation for employment fraud. The article was brief, citing unnamed sources and declining to name specific individuals, but it was enough to trigger a cascade of consequences. ArcLight's stock price, already under pressure from weak quarterly earnings, dropped 15% in a single trading session. Their largest client, a renewable energy consortium, announced they were reviewing their relationship with the company. The board of directors called an emergency meeting. I watched it all unfold from my kitchen table, tracking news coverage and social media chatter while sipping coffee from a mug that read, "World's Okayest Auditor." A gag gift from my team last Christmas. Back when I still had a team. The irony wasn't lost on me. Bradley's first public statement was a masterpiece of corporate doublespeak. ArcLight Systems is cooperating fully with regulatory authorities and is confident that any review will confirm our commitment to ethical business practices. He looked confident on camera, his silver hair perfectly styled, his expression conveying the kind of righteous indignation that came naturally to men who'd never been held accountable for their actions. But I knew something the cameras couldn't capture. Bradley's tell was his left hand when he was lying. He had a habit of tapping his index finger against his thumb. He'd done it during board meetings when discussing the consultant payments, during staff meetings when claiming the employment reclassifications were temporary, during the company retreat when promising that layoffs were off the table. He was doing it now. The second wave of investigation hit 2 weeks later. ProPublica, the investigative journalism nonprofit, published a comprehensive analysis of ArcLight's financial records. They'd somehow obtained documents that I hadn't been able to access. Board meeting minutes, executive compensation details, correspondence between Bradley and his family members. The picture they painted was damning. Bradley had used his position to systematically loot the company, funneling money to relatives through fake consulting contracts while simultaneously cutting costs by eliminating employee benefits. The total amount of the fraud exceeded $7 million when all the related transactions were tallied. But the most shocking revelation was the timeline. The fraud had begun just 6 months after Bradley's appointment as CEO, suggesting it was premeditated rather than opportunistic. He'd taken the job specifically to steal from the company. I felt vindicated and sick in equal measure. Vindicated because my suspicions had been correct. Sick because I'd waited too long to act. How many employees had lost their benefits while I sat on evidence that could have stopped the fraud earlier? The phone call came on a Wednesday morning. Mr. Price, this is David Castellanos from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We'd like to schedule a time to discuss your employment at ArcLight Systems. I'd been expecting this call for weeks. I'm available whenever you need me. How about this afternoon? We have some questions about the documents you provided to the IRS. The FBI field office in Denver was exactly what I'd expected. Sterile, institutional, designed to intimidate. Agent Castellanos was younger than I'd anticipated, maybe early 30s, with the kind of earnest demeanor that suggested he genuinely believed in his work. You understand you're not under investigation, he began. You're a witness in a federal fraud case, but we need to verify the authenticity of your evidence and understand how you obtained it. I walked him through my role at ArcLight, my access to financial documents, my growing suspicions about the consulting payments. He took notes in a leather-bound notebook, occasionally asking for clarification. Why didn't you report this earlier? He asked. It was the question I'd been dreading. I was afraid of retaliation. I needed the job, and I didn't have enough evidence to prove fraud. I thought I might be wrong. But you kept copies of everything. Insurance policy. If I was ever questioned about the payments, I wanted documentation to protect myself. He nodded. Lucky for us. Most internal fraud cases fall apart because employees destroy evidence or claim they didn't know what they were seeing. Your documentation makes this case prosecutable. The grand jury indictment was unsealed on a Thursday in November. Bradley Torrance, former CEO of ArcLight Systems, was charged with conspiracy to commit wire fraud, tax evasion, and violations of federal labor law. The document was 19 pages long, detailing a systematic scheme to defraud the company of more than $7 million. I read the indictment in my car outside the courthouse, having driven down from Boulder to obtain a copy as soon as it was publicly available. The language was dry, legal, clinical. But between the lines was a story of betrayal and greed that had cost dozens of people their livelihoods. The trial began 6 months later. I testified on the second day, walking the jury through the financial documents I'd preserved. Bradley's attorney, a sharp-dressed woman from a white-shoe Denver firm, tried to paint me as a disgruntled employee seeking revenge against the company that had terminated me. Isn't it true, Mr. Price, that you were fired for performance issues? She asked during cross-examination. No, I was terminated as part of cost-cutting measures. Cost-cutting measures that you disagreed with? I disagreed with the illegal aspects of those measures, yes. She pressed harder. You admit you took confidential company documents without authorization? I maintained copies of documents I had legitimate access to as part of my job responsibilities. Documents you kept in your home, away from company premises? Yes. Documents you've now used to destroy the career of a man who trusted you? I looked at Bradley, sitting at the defense table in an expensive suit that couldn't hide the fact that his career was already over. Mr. Torrance destroyed his own career when he decided to steal from his company. The jury deliberated for 3 days. When they returned, the foreman read the verdict in a steady voice. Guilty on all counts. I wasn't in the courtroom for the sentencing. I'd said what I needed to say during the trial. And I had no interest in watching Bradley's final humiliation. The news reports were sufficient. 5 years in federal prison, full restitution to ArcLight and its employees, permanent ban from serving as a corporate officer. ArcLight Systems itself didn't survive the scandal. The company was sold to a competitor for a fraction of its previous value. Most of the employees found new jobs, though not all of them landed on their feet. The ripple effects of corporate fraud always extend beyond the executive suite. I found work with a smaller firm in Fort Collins, doing the same kind of auditing work I'd done at ArcLight. The pay was lower, the office smaller, the cases less complex. But I slept better at night, knowing I worked for people who valued integrity over profits. The whistleblower reward from the IRS was substantial, 15% of the recovered funds, which came to just over $1 million after taxes. I used part of it to buy a modest cabin in the mountains, a place where I could disappear on weekends and remember what quiet sounded like. I never spoke to Bradley Torrance again. I never wanted to. The fraud case was about more than money. It was about the responsibility that comes with power, the trust that employees place in their leaders, the difference between legal and ethical behavior. On quiet evenings in my mountain cabin, I sometimes wondered what would have happened if I'd spoken up earlier, if I'd reported my suspicions when I first noticed the irregular payments, if I'd prioritized justice over job security. But regret was a luxury I couldn't afford. I'd done what I could with the information I had when I had the courage to use it. Sometimes that's enough. The bourbon still burned going down, but the taste was cleaner now. The whiskey didn't carry the bitterness of compromise or the weight of unspoken truths. It was just bourbon, nothing more, nothing less. In the end, that's all any of us can be, exactly what we are, no more, no less. The difference is whether we choose to be honest about it. I chose honesty. Finally, the last piece of mail I received from ArcLight was a check for accumulated vacation time, delivered 6 months after the company's bankruptcy filing. The amount was $2,847.32, representing 3 weeks of unused vacation from my final year of employment. I deposited the check and used the money to buy a new fishing rod. Every time I cast that line into a mountain stream, I remember the lesson I learned the hard way. Sometimes the most expensive truth is the one you're afraid to tell. Bradley Torrance taught me that lesson, though I doubt he intended to. He showed me what happens when ambition isn't tempered by conscience, when the pursuit of profit becomes disconnected from basic human decency. He also taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite fear. I was terrified when I filed those complaints, uncertain about the consequences for my career and my future. But I'd learned that some battles are worth fighting, regardless of the personal cost. The mountains outside my cabin window are eternal, shaped by forces beyond human control. But the decisions we make, the stands we take, the truths we choose to tell, those are entirely within our power. I chose to tell the truth. In the end, that choice made all the difference. The story of ArcLight Systems became a case study in business school ethics courses, a cautionary tale about the importance of internal controls and whistleblower protection. Students read about the fraud, analyzed the financial statements, debated the moral implications of corporate malfeasance. What they can't learn from textbooks is the human cost of these decisions, the employees who lost their health insurance, the families who struggled to make ends meet, the communities that lost jobs when the company collapsed. Numbers on a spreadsheet can't capture the weight of those consequences, but they can be a starting point for understanding why integrity matters in business, why financial controls exist, why employees need protection when they report wrongdoing. I never set out to be a whistleblower. I just wanted to do my job well, to provide accurate financial information that would help the company make good decisions. When I discovered that the company's leadership was making decisions based on greed rather than good business sense, I had to choose between my personal security and my professional integrity. I chose integrity. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't without cost, but it was the right choice. The final irony is that Bradley Torrance achieved his goal of cutting costs. He eliminated my position, along with dozens of others. He reduced employee benefits, increased contractor relationships, and streamlined operations. He also eliminated his own job, destroyed his career, and sent himself to federal prison. Sometimes the most effective cost-cutting measure is the one that cuts deepest.